So welcome again. I'm the Venerable Moira Astin. I'm Archdeacon of Reigate, and I've been involved with ecclesiastical law since being on General Synod from 2000. And so mine is a working priest's knowledge of ecclesiastical law rather than a formal legal training. But you can pick up quite a lot as a working priest, partly by getting it wrong and then being put right. Russell, do say hello to people and who you are, and then we'll go into the topic, which is who's who in ecclesiastical law.
Thanks, Moira. Yes, I'm Russell Dewhurst. I'm Communications Officer of the ELS, a PhD student in canon law, and I've got plenty of experience in parish ministry as well.
So today, who are the people we should be thinking about when we're thinking about ecclesiastical law?
Well, this seemed like the proper third episode of Bitesize. We've looked at what and why in this introductory triplet, and we're now going to think about who, because whenever one reads about ecclesiastical law, hears anything about ecclesiastical law, there are all sorts of people, aren't there? Offices, roles, bodies that we hear about. And in just 15 minutes or so, I thought I'd take a real whistle-stop tour with just a sentence or two about each of these bodies, what they are, how they relate. Because often perhaps we hear about a registrar or general synod, but maybe we're not all completely sure who these bodies are. And I thought to structure this, I'd work through the different levels, starting at the most local in church on Sunday at the parish, and moving up gradually, moving up not in order of importance, but in breadth of geography through diocese to national level, if there's time, maybe even beyond that.
So we're going to start in the centre of the Church of England, which is each and every parish.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So the people that we see in church on Sunday, they have important roles in worship or as worshippers, but many of those people in each parish have particular roles, functions, offices that are important in ecclesiastical law. And the parochial church council is where I want to begin, PCC for short. And the PCC is a group that has, I would say, two important sets of roles and functions. The PCC is important in charity law because the members of the PCC are the trustees, effectively, of the charity, responsible for the budgets, the insurance, the making sure that the PCC carries out its charitable purpose. And also the PCC has a role as the most local level of church governance. So it's consulted in liturgical decisions relating to the other levels of church governance and so on. And mostly democratically elected. If you're a lay person in the church, you can elect your lay representatives if you're on the electoral roll of the church, which is a bit like a membership list for the Church of England. You can then vote for your representatives on the PCC. And then chairing the PCC, there's the incumbent. And the incumbent, another of those words which is used a lot in ecclesiastical law, and it's a word that means vicar or rector. So you might have a vicar in a parish, you might have a rector, but that person's the incumbent. Or you might have a priest in charge. And whichever title the priest has, that priest chairs the PCC and also has various important powers and duties legally of their own. And then finally, at parish level, I want to mention the church wardens, really important, also elected by lay people in the parish. Usually they're ex officio on the PCC, and they have important additional duties, legal ones to do with the building, reporting about church and its property, keeping order in the church, and that sort of thing. So PCC, incumbent, wardens, they're some of the bodies at parish level. Now, we could go on at the local level to talk about cathedrals and religious communities and bishops' missions order, but we're not going to do that. We'll save that for future bite-sized episodes, I think, because we want to move on.
And I'm sure we're going to have a future bite-sized episode on church wardens, not least as an archdeacon. I know I do some training for church wardens, and having something that we've got captured to help them have a pithy understanding of their role would be great. So we've got the parish level, and I guess then there's the diocesan level.
Before we get to the diocese, I did want to talk really briefly about a couple of other levels between the parish and the diocese, because again, we often hear about them, because the diocese is made up often of a few hundred parishes. It's, I think, 360 here in Chichester. But before we get to that level, parishes are grouped in deaneries. I think usually 10, 15 parishes making up a deanery. Again, there are elected representatives to the deanery synod. That's a group of people who gather to discuss church business at this deanery level, so still quite local. Also, clergy at the deanery synod. There's a deanery lay chair and a priest who's called a rural dean or an area dean, and they chair this deanery synod. And I think it's fair to say the deanery synod has relatively few powers in ecclesiastical law, but is involved with the reorganization of ministry, pastoral reorganization, and is consulted about significant national legislation. And then, so that's the deanery. And then the next level up, we might think of it as a separate level, Moira, but I'm sure it's your favorite one, archdeaconry level. And several of these deaneries I've mentioned make up an archdeaconry. And in the diocese, you will have usually, say, 2 or 4, maybe even 6 archdeaconries, breaking the diocese up. And each archdeaconry has an archdeacon, like you, Moira. So I thought if I just say very briefly what I think an archdeacon does in ecclesiastical law, then maybe you correct me, fill in the blanks. But it seems to me the main thing, archdeacons have a huge portfolio of responsibilities in the law of the church, to do with faculties, that's the changes to buildings and churchyards, pastoral reorganization again, patronage when there are vacancies, archdeacons are often involved, clergy discipline, parsonages, vicarages, rectories, and then the general watching brief of care over parishes and clergy within the archdeacon, keeping the bishop informed, and so on. Does that ring true? Is that
I mean, we're the go-between people. If you like to think of the bishop as the captain of the ship, we're the people who are running backwards and forwards, perhaps tinkering around with the engines. Or if you like to think of a human body, if the parishes are the hands and feet of the body that is the church, and the bishop is the head giving a thought and a plan, we must be the nervous system. And boy, do we sometimes get nervous about it. And there's very few things like committees at our level. So as far as the General Synod is concerned, they will talk to dioceses and then dioceses to deaneries. I think the only committee I have is the Archdeaconry Mission and Pastoral Committee. But I do have a right to be on pretty much everything else in the diocese. Some dioceses structure things so that if we have 6 archdeacons, not absolutely every archdeacon has to be absolutely every meeting. But still, we have an important, as they go-between role between individual parishes and their clergy, but also church wardens. And I would see us as the first place of support for church wardens and for parish clergy. And when it comes to ecclesiastical law, though, as I said, I'm not a trained lawyer, we pick up a lot of the law as we go along. And so we can give, just as in this bite size, we don't say that we are going to give you anything that is formal legal opinion. We can likewise not give you formal legal opinion. If parish needs formal legal opinion, I'm afraid they need to pay for it unless we can argue this is a way in which the bishop's getting a legal opinion. And if the bishop's getting the legal opinion, well then at that point it's the bishop's retainer with a law firm that comes into play. But that's moving us on to the diocesan level, so I think I'll pass it back to you, Russell, to talk about the diocese and the person I've just mentioned.
Absolutely, bishop and registrar. That's right. So at the diocesan level, the principal person that we are concerned with, especially when we're thinking about ecclesiastical law, would be the diocesan bishop. And what might be maybe not obvious is often in a canon, you will see something that said that the bishop will do this. And then you might say, well, in our diocese, we have 3 bishops, perhaps, but one bishop whose title is the same as the diocese, that is the diocesan bishop. So in Chichester Diocese, the Bishop of Chichester, Bishop Martin, is the Darson bishop, so referred to sometimes simply as the bishop. And many powers in the law of the church rest ultimately with the bishop: ordination, liturgical matters, disciplinary, buildings, and so on. And even if sometimes the bishop is very hands-on, sometimes these powers and duties are delegated or handled by someone else. And in particular, the bishop will delegate many responsibilities to the other bishops, the suffragan bishops or the assistant bishops, who are the other bishops in the diocese. And then the bishop has another alter ego who isn't a bishop, and that's the chancellor. And the chancellor is basically the bishop's judge, the judge who sits in the consistory court. So this is mainly when we come to faculty decisions. That's when you, as we were saying the other day, when you want to make changes to a church building, a faculty decision, faculty petition needs to be made, and the judgment is made by the chancellor, the bishop's judge. And then you've already mentioned the other principal legal person in the Diocese Moira, the registrar, who's the bishop's legal advisor, principal legal advisor, usually a solicitor, usually supported by a firm of solicitors, as you say, paid a retainer to advise on official duties. The registrar is also the registrar of that consistory court I mentioned. Is also involved in clergy discipline. So from the point of view of other people involved in the law of the church, the registrar is the person one often communicates with about documentation of various kinds and various proceedings. And then just
there's also another thing with that, with patronage, since we had some training on patronage yesterday. If we become aware that a benefice is going to become vacant, we let the registrar know, because it's the registrar who holds the books which tell us who the patrons are of every benefice. So it's a very important role. And then they handle some of the information about letting patrons know. And then, of course, when we're actually going to do the filling of the post, we again rely on the registrar for all the legal documents we need there.
Absolutely. And then staying at this Darson level just for another minute, there are all sorts of Darson boards and committees, and many of them are statutory. And we haven't got time to go into all of them now, but I just want to mention two in particular: the Diocesan Advisory Committee and the DAC advises when a parish petitions for a faculty. You want to make a change to your church building, especially a significant one, but indeed most minor ones as well. Advice from this great panel of experts in all sorts of heritage and other areas will supply the advice. That's the DAC. They've got that.
And we're advising the Chancellor at that point. Mm-hmm. And so for a faculty, you can apply for a faculty. We have to have issued a certificate of advice to the Chancellor. Informally, we often advise back to parishes about what we think the Chancellor is likely to accept or not. Oh. Sorry, Russell, carry on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then the Darson Synods, the other body I was going to mention, again, elected body, although not directly elected by lay people in the parish, but elected by their representatives. The as in the General Synod, the Diocesan Synod meets a few times a year to discuss matters of importance to the whole diocese. In particular, agrees the diocesan budget. That isn't the budget for the whole diocese, that is the budget for the central institutions of the diocese. The parishes, of course, have their own budget, and the Darson Synod is also consulted and communication up and down, as it were, to the General Synod that we haven't got to yet, and to the parishes.
And for the final thing on the diocese is the Diocesan Board of Finance, which is usually registered as the legal charity that is that level of the Church of England. People sometimes get confused because they think, well, if you've got that legal charity, it's the charity for all that the churches of the Church of England in that area. But it's not, because the PCCs are separately registered as separate charities. Those charities have a relationship with each other, but they are legally, according to charity law, independent charities. So that's all the stuff at a diocesan level, what's next?
Well, the next level is provinces. We have 2 provinces in the Church of England, each of which has an archbishop. There's the province of Canterbury and the province of York. They each have an archbishop, as most people will have heard of those archbishops. And all the dioceses of the Church of England, and therefore all the parishes as well, are either in one province or another. But most of the time, in legal matters, the 2 provinces act together.
So, great, that's the national level. So is it time to move on, or is there anything else to talk about?
Well, those 2 provinces acting together, yeah, absolutely, the national level. So I think I'll mention probably 3 things at the national level. As I say, in the Church of England, those provinces usually act together. So we're thinking about the Church of England national level, and it's a principle among Anglican churches that you can see that the national level is seen as autonomous. So probably, given the time, we're going to stop in a minute when we finish the national level, because decisions made, at least legally speaking, decisions are made at national level, and any ecumenical or Anglican communion relations aren't formal legal ones. And the 3 bodies I want to mention at national level, first of all, the King, who's the supreme governor of the Church of England. And I wrote an article in the ELJ last year summarising all the roles that the King has as supreme governor of the Church of England. He gives royal assent to church legislation. He exercises significant patronage, but does all that on the advice of his minister, who, at least for a couple more days, is usually Rishi Sunak. The second body I want to mention is the General Synod. So we hear about the General Synod a lot. That's the synod at the national, at Church of England level, made up by a house of bishops, a house of clergy, and a house of laity, again, indirectly elected. And the General Synod legislates for the church, and it holds various national level institutions to account in various ways. And so when General Synod meets this weekend, many of the things that we'll be discussing and we'll hear about in the news will result in changes to canons or new legislation by measure. So the General Synod, really important for the legislation for the new law of the church. And then finally, I could again go on, as with dioceses, there are many committees and institutions and boards and bodies of various kinds at national level. Not time to mention them all, but one to mention is Archbishop's Council, relatively new compared to most of the other bodies we've been talking about today. The Archbishop's Council acts in some respects like a kind of executive board overseeing the life of the national church. General Synod only meets 2 or 3 times a year for a few days. The Archbishop's Council has that continuity, overseeing as I say, the many aspects of what the church does. Although at the moment, this coming weekend, General Synod will be considering proposals to overhaul the national institutions of the church and look again at how many of these national level bodies interact and how many there should be and all those sorts of questions. So that will be debated this weekend.
So, lots of different people and bodies.
That's right. Yeah, huge numbers, lot to get your head round. That is a very quick whistle-stop tour. And I think that to conclude, the principle I'd want to draw out of this is there are so many different bodies at so many different levels, and that's come about for a reason, because it's important that decisions are made at the right level. So there have to be bodies at all these levels so that the life of the parish can go forward, with each parish making its own proper decisions, likewise the diocese. And then there are some things that need to be discussed or decided or administered by the whole Church of England together. So we have the bodies and people at that level as well. And how different tasks and decisions are arranged in these different levels is actually what my PhD thesis is all about. But I think, having mentioned that, now is the time to come to an end, or we'd be here for a few more hours yet.
Indeed. So thank you, Russell. Thank you for that. And if you now stop the recording, we can invite people to unmute and ask some questions.